Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Leah Goldberg, and I'm an advisor to the Environmental Law Section Executive Committee and co-chair of the Legislation Committee for the Environmental Law Section. And in my professional job, I'm an ALJ with the California Public Utilities Commission. So today I am honored and excited to introduce you to Sabrina Ashjian, who will be giving us a 101 on California legislation. But more than that, Sabrina has tips about how to get involved, how to watch the legislature. She's a wealth of information, and I'm so honored to have her here and to work with her. Sabrina is Project Director and Clinical Supervising Attorney at the Emmett Institute on Climate Change in the Environment and the California Environmental Legislation and Policy Clinic at UCLA School of Law. She was previously with the Environmental Law Clinic at Berkeley School of Law, where she taught environmental justice and legislation courses. Sabrina's been, she has all kinds of accolades and honors. But I just want to mention that she's been appointed by 2 California governors, first to the Cannabis Control Appeals Panel, and most recently by Governor Newsom to the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. She received her law degree from Pepperdine University, and we are so excited to have her here. And I'd like to turn it over to Sabrina so she can get started. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leah. It's so great to be here with all of you. I was just talking with Leah off screen about how many years we've been doing this. I think maybe 5 for California Lawyers Association. I previously co-chaired with her for the section, so I'm going to be chatting about that a little bit later. But it's wonderful to be here with all of you. Looking forward to having this conversation. This is intended as a 101, just an explainer about the California Legislature timeline, that sort of thing. I know CLA is also doing a different legislation presentation tomorrow on how to get involved and how CLA as an organization can work on legislation. And if you have questions that are more specific or more advanced, please put those in the chat. Happy to take those questions and also happy to talk more offline later. I've put my email in here. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Thank you so much. All right.
If I could interrupt for just a second.
Please.
Actually, if you have questions and answer, or if you have questions, put them in the question box and we'll get to them at the end.
Oh yeah, sorry, I think I said chat. Thank you. Yes. All right. So many of you may remember Bill on Capitol Hill, or I might be aging myself that I remember Bill on Capitol Hill. But just wanted to explain what legislation is and what is taking place in the legislature. So legislation is the act or process of making or enacting laws. The bills are the proposed legislation that are under consideration by the legislature. The legislative session in California lasts for 2 years. It's considered full-time. It runs from approximately January to September, October, and there is a month gap over the summer for a summer recess. We are just starting the first of a 2-year session. There are 40 state senators and 80 assembly members. So each person has 1 state senator and 1 assembly member that they are assigned to in their district. And as a little bit of a fun fact, almost 25% of the legislature is new this session. So 29 new folks who are representing us. One of the key items that I wanted to make sure to highlight early on in this conversation is that the bill amounts have been reduced for the first time in a couple of years. So there were previously about 5,600 bills that could be introduced over the course of the 2 years. State senators had 40 bills that they could introduce over those 2 years, and assembly members had 50 bills that they could introduce over those 2 years. And it was becoming a bit unwieldy, especially for those of us who are tracking bills, to be tracking so many bills in so many different fields of study. And the legislative leadership decided to reduce those limits so that they could really focus more on quality versus quantity, and really delve deeply into issues. A lot of the issues that the California legislature is dealing with right now are very entrenched, complex issues. And so they really wanted there to be time to delve deeply into those bills and into those policy committee discussions. So now everybody has 35 bills that they can introduce over the course of the 2 years in whichever order they see fit, making the maximum number of bills that can be introduced 4,200, which, as I mentioned, is a reduction of about 25%, or 1,400 bills fewer. So this will be the first year that we're seeing that. And so we'll probably be seeing the benefits of being able to track more closely, especially in our legislative committee. And we can go on to the next slide. So I'm giving you the legislative landscape for last year, even though, as I mentioned, it's going to be a little bit different this year because of the bill limits. But last year, about 2,100 bills were introduced. About 1,200 of those went to the governor, with about 1,000 of those being signed, giving a veto rate of about 15.6%. Which was average for how Governor Newsom has been handling things. So this is kind of a good indicator, but obviously the numbers are going to be a little bit different because of the bill limit reduction. But it does give you a sense of the about half have been moving forward. And then this slide is very dense, but it was just to show how many bills were being introduced every year over the past decade or so, with the limits obviously now being imposed. So you don't need to memorize this slide. We can go on to the next one. All right, so some of the big issues that are being faced, obviously you probably are all well aware of it, and probably dealing with many of these in your own practice areas as well as your own lives. So we have a continued budget deficit that is impacting bills that have a fiscal impact, whether or not those are going to move forward. And so the state is having some tough conversations about what we need to move forward on, what can wait, what needs funding. And the budget process is a whole other process that I'm happy to discuss, and also potentially happy to do a separate presentation on, because it kind of runs in tandem to the legislative process. Wildfires, we're seeing a lot of legislation starting on this in terms of rebuilding, resilience, building codes, CEQA challenges, and so we will continue to see that as bills get introduced. The issue of insurance in California, I'm sure many of you are aware and following, potentially personally impacted with that conversation. Cap and trade reauthorization conversations are beginning again this session. And then others, I'd love to hear from all of you in the Q&A, or later, about other big issues that you're seeing or facing. And then we can go on to the next slide. So this is the 2025 legislative timeline. The legislature is always around these dates, give or take a little bit. So the legislature reconvened on January 6th last month. The bill introduction deadline is coming up. It's next Friday, a week from Friday. The last day for each house to pass bills that were introduced in that house, the House of Origin, is June 6th this year. And then the legislature has until September 12th for bills to pass out of the alternate house. And then that gives the governor a month to sign or veto the bills, which will be on October 12th. So this just gives you an idea of right before those last days. Those are really big impact days of reaching out to your legislator to voice your support or concern over a bill. And then you will be able to know, when you should be tracking, when you should be following bills, when you should be advocating for those. And then we can go on to the next. So this is a very challenging slide. I'm obviously going to break it down, but it's just to show you that the life cycle of legislation is complex, and we're going to break it down for you right now, so we don't need to spend time focusing on this, but just wanted to show that there's a lot of moving parts over the course of the cycle. All right, so how does a bill become a law? So it starts as an idea. I'm going to break down all of these in next slides. Then there's an author, an introduction and first reading, policy committee hearings, a second and third reading, and then repeat the process in the other house. So what does that mean? I'm going to break it down now. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so all bills obviously become, come into fruition based upon an idea. But the reason why I wanted to focus on this slide is because those ideas can come from you and often do. So things that you're seeing in your individual lives, things that you're seeing in your work life, are great concepts for legislators to hear about and figure out if there should be a law or a law change. The legislators come in with their own backgrounds and experiences, but they obviously can't know everything about every topic. And so our voices on the ground of being a constituent or being interested in a certain policy area are really beneficial for them to hear about, and great ways of getting involved. So a senator or an assembly member then decides to author a bill. Bills can also come from various NGOs and nonprofit organizations that focus on specific issue areas. They can come with a bill concept and pitch that and shop that around. Senators and assembly members can come up with legislation on their own that are things that they came into the legislature wanting to focus on, or something from their background or experience. So there's a variety of ways that these ideas turn into potential legislation. And then the author sends the concept to the Legislative Council, which I'm going to go into in the next slide. Oh, maybe not. I meant to do the next slide as the Legislative Council, but maybe that's coming in the next slide. So I'll talk about this one and then go to that. I think I got a little out of order. So the introduction and first reading, the clerk reads the bill number, the name of the author, the descriptive title of the bill. I think that the only reason I'm including this, and you might already know it, is because sometimes it seems pretty mysterious, like what does introduced mean? And so this is just what that means. So the Office of the Legislative Council usually is the entity that drafts and reviews bill language. Obviously, legislators can draft their own, but often it goes through the Legislative Council, who are experts in this drafting, and they will be the ones to look to see if there are any issues of preemption. They will look to see if there are any issues with other laws that are currently in effect, where they would conflict with one another, and they don't share the information that is being discussed in the legislation until it's introduced. All right, so after the introduction and the first reading, bills get introduced. Bills will then be sent to policy committees. And so these are various legislative topics that are on a wide range of issues. There's environmental quality, toxic safety, judiciary, higher education. So there's a number of different areas that a bill can go to. And then these are a smaller select group of legislators who will delve more deeply into the bills prior to them going to the whole assembly or the whole Senate. This is a great place if you're looking to advocate on a bill, if you're looking to share your thoughts, concerns, or support of a bill. These are great places to do that, because these are the lawmakers who are delving very deeply into those bills. You can find out online, and I'll show you how after, about how to follow when a bill is going to be in a policy committee. Sometimes bills are sent to 2 policy committees, sometimes they're sent to 3 policy committees, sometimes they're heard a couple of times in those policy committees as issues are as the language itself is being amended. But these are great places to plug in and get involved. The one other thing I'll just mention about that, but we can stay on this slide, is that Policy committees have full-time staff dedicated to that, so that's a great person to communicate with also about the topic at hand. So second and third readings are just after they'll go through the policy committees. They're then read a few more times throughout the entire legislature and then voted on. Assembly bills will be voted on by the full assembly. Senate bills will be voted on by the full Senate. And then the process repeats in the other house. So they move out of the House of Origin into the other house. Whole process repeats until the very end, when they have hopefully passed from both houses and then move to the governor's desk. These are some tools for tracking legislation so that you can follow along and see if there's specific bills that you're interested in, when they are having a hearing, when they are up for a floor vote, that sort of thing. So LegInfo is a great resource, free resource that is put out by the legislature. LegiScan is another, where you can get one state for free to monitor, and then additional states you pay for. And then there's a number of paid software options if this is something that you're doing on a more full-time basis, or you are tracking a number of bills over a lot of different areas. Then you might want to invest in some paid software. All right, so some of the hurdles that bills face. There are so many bills, and so one of the biggest hurdles that bills face is just competition for attention. Legislators can only focus on so many bills and issues at a time, and so a lot of times it's really important for advocacy groups to really highlight a bill that they're interested in, that they're supporting or opposing, because of the fact that you're bringing it to the attention in the forefront, and they might pay more attention to the issue that's at hand. Passing both houses. So bills historically have had an easier time passing out of the first house because of the fact that the assembly members who introduce the bill to their assembly colleagues have a more collegial relationship than when they go to the other house. We haven't seen that as much in the past few years, but that is something that has historically been considered a little bit harder to move out of the second house. Bills face the hurdle of becoming a two-year bill. If there's an issue that's especially complex, there's a lot of opposition, there's a big fiscal impact, the bill is just not well fleshed out yet, or the topic is too big to handle in 1 year, bills become a two-year bill. Sometimes that's a kiss of death, but other times it really is just the 2 years are needed for that time to delve more deeply into it. So it's not always a kiss of death, but it can be a challenge to have that bill become a two-year bill. Appropriations Committee and suspense file. Bills that have a fiscal impact over a certain threshold will then go to the Appropriations Committee, put on a suspense file, and handled at the end when it's determined, when they can all be looked at together to determine what bills can move forward depending on what the budget situation is for California. And so this is often a challenging item if your bill is keyed as something that's going to have a fiscal impact and gets stuck in this process, because it becomes a bit opaque as to what is able to move forward and what gets heard in the committee. All right, so getting to the governor's desk, bills that have passed from both houses obviously will then go to the governor. The governor can veto or sign the bill into law. There's also an option of not doing anything, which rarely happens, but so that's why I didn't include it in the slide. If the governor signs the bill, it will be assigned a chapter number by the Secretary of State. Typically, the bills will then go into effect the following January. There are exceptions to this where bills could go into effect immediately. And then there are times where bills will have a delayed start of a year or a couple of years, particularly if there's an industry that needs to change its processes in order to accommodate the new legislation. There's usually a delayed start date. All right, so finding your representative so that you can find out who to reach out to and follow along with. Your representatives have 2 offices. Some have more district offices, but mostly 2. So one is in the Sacramento Capitol office, which is not quite in the Capitol right now, in the annex, and then a district office, or as I mentioned, some of the jurisdictions are very large, so they have more than one district office. To visit their websites, all of the websites are Senate District, SD, and then XX is the number, and then Assembly is A, and then the number to find out about them. And then also most of the legislators are pretty active on social media. So it's great to follow along and find out, what they're focusing on, what hearings they're having, what press releases are coming out right now about bills that they're introducing, and that sort of thing. And so it's great to follow them and kind of find out what's happening. All right, so now I'm going to go into, and I'm going to invite Leah also to join into the conversation. Wanted to explain what the California Lawyers Association's Environmental Law Section Legislative Committee does, should you wish to join, and we hope that you will want to get involved. I previously co-chaired it. I stepped back maybe a year ago. And Leah has continued on with some other folks, so it's wonderful to see all of the activity that's been taking place in the legislative committee. But we just wanted to explain what the legislative committee is and isn't, because it's not an advocacy committee. People who are in the environmental law section are often on a range of different issues, and so we provide more technical assistance and review because of our expertise, our environmental backgrounds and expertise. A lot of times environmental legislation that's being introduced is being introduced by those who might not have an environmental background. And so we do serve as a really key resource to the legislature, and as one who we have developed prior to my joining and participating. So many members of the California Lawyers Association's Environmental Law Section really created and forged those relationships with the legislators, with the policy committee consultants, with staffers, so that we would have that back and forth and good rapport and good reputation. So we review bills on a variety of environmental issues, as you can imagine, land use, energy, natural resources, and we provide, as I mentioned, nonpartisan feedback. If there are specific issue areas that you are an expert in and would like to focus your legislative efforts on, you can do that, or at least previously that's what we did, so that you would be able to review with that eye and that lens. Leah, let me know if there's anything you want to add on this slide, and the next couple of slides also will explain a little bit more in depth about what we do.
Why don't you go forward, and then I'll just fill in any holes.
Perfect. All right, we'll go to the next slide. All right, so how I say how we do it, because I used to do it, but really how they do it right now is and Leah can correct me if things have changed. Previously, we had split up environmental bills for reviews aligned with practice area and interest to the degree that we were able to do so. So if you state on the form that you want to get involved and your background is in water, trying to give you bills that highlight the water issues, water legislation. As I mentioned, we're reviewing for technical flaws, which I'm going to go into in the next slide. We really want to, interact with the legislative office, the author, to provide assistance, report back to the committee, and to notify our committee members of new environmental legislation that's signed by the governor. So that's the step at the very end, where we'll usually do a review as to what went through. And this is a really good resource for California Lawyers Association Environmental Law Section members. And one of our members, Gary Lux, often does an article about the various environmental legislation that's passed. And so it's really helpful to see at the end to have a sense of what's coming, especially in your practice areas. All right, so what are technical flaws? So Technical flaws could be undefined terms, ambiguity, enforceability issues. Is there an enforcing agency? Does it list that? Or is it going to hot potato around between, let's say, the AG's office and the local DA's offices because they're not really sure who is supposed to be handling or enforcing an issue? Are there missing references? Are there internal inconsistencies in the bill? Are there duplicative terms? Is there a conflict with another law? And obviously this is something legislative council might pick up on, but sometimes, something can slip through and you might know that there's another law that's on the books that would be a conflict. Is there an inadequate response to a judicial decision? Is it beyond constitutional limits? Other things, though these often get picked up, by the legislative council. Is it something that's not ripe? Is it something that should be handled by federal? Is it something that should be handled by locals? And so those are some of the issues that could come up that would make the bill really ineffective if it moved forward. And then this was the timeline when I was around, so Leah can say if things are being handled differently. We are now in the Legislative 101 Zoom meeting and presentation. In March, there will be a legislative day that will take place in Sacramento. And then the way we had handled it was a planning meeting in June, in August a check-in, in October a Zoom recap, and then write up and submit the legislative summaries. Obviously, this can change a little bit depending on if the committee decides to pursue work for bills in the introductory house. We had been doing it after they passed out of the House of Origin, and then we're in the second house because it cut down on the number of bills significantly. We were looking at about 600-ish environmental bills. And so this was a way of cutting it down so that we weren't focusing on so many. We were kind of letting things filter out by the policy committees, by the assembly, by the staffers, and then did our work over the summer. I don't know if that's still the case.
So it's not.
Okay.
Last year, we just realized that there were some pretty significant bills, and we wanted the opportunity to weigh in their House of Origin. So we've moved things up so that we have a first look in the House of Origin and discuss it. And then we don't want to take a lot of people's time, because we appreciate the time you're donating to review the legislation and be part of the committee. So we ask that our first meeting will probably be this year, sometime in April, maybe beginning of May. But we really do want eyes on all of our bill, on all of the legislation in the House of Origin. So, and then we'll meet again. We'll have that eyes on the bill again in the second chamber, and then afterwards we'll do kind of a true up of what passed.
Great, thank you. I should have checked with you prior to putting up this slide. So thank you for explaining, and let me know if there is, or let the audience know if there are other items that I perhaps missed or have changed with regard to the process generally.
Right, so okay. Can I jump in for just a second?
Please do, yes.
Before we go to questions. I just wanted to say a little bit more about CLA and the Environmental Law Section Ledge Committee. It's a great way to get involved with the Environmental Law Section. It's often a stepping stone to those people who go on to serve on the Executive Committee, because by then you'll know people who will, we know that you're involved and interested and committed to the section. Now, what is the commitment? So Sabrina went through very detailed discussion of what we do in the Legislative Committee and how it dovetails with the legislative session. But I just wanted to say that I would say on average, over the course of the entire legislative session, it's maybe an hour a week some weeks will certainly be busier. Those weeks that you're reviewing legislation, jumping on the phone possibly with committee staff or with legislator staff, then you might be spending a little bit more time, but it's not a huge time commitment. And what do you get out of it? You get out of it learning so much about the process, being hands-on in the legislative process, watching bills become laws, watching the sausage making that happens in Sacramento. The Ledge Day, there was a question about Ledge Day, and I we'll go back to the other questions in a moment. But the question was, is the March 9th Ledge Day in addition to the one on April 9th? Well, they're different. The April 9th Ledge Day is a CLA-wide, and all California Lawyers Association members are invited to attend. The Ledge Day for the Environmental Law Section is an exclusive invitation to those people who serve on our committee, who have committed to review legislation, and are on the executive committee. So it's really a small group. It's a private conversation with legislative staff to hear what the priorities are for the year. So it's a little bit different than the California Lawyers Association event, which is just a different kind of legislative activity day. And I think that with that, I just wanted to say one more thing about the Ledge Committee, and that the co-chair for this year is Justin Zucker, and Justin can be reached, and I'm going to give you his email. So actually, if you're interested, you can email CLA and let them know you're interested in the Environmental Law Section, Environmental or Legislation Committee. And Pam, if you would put that in the question and answers, and then also in the question and answer, I will put Justin's email address. As a co-chair, he's the one, we divide up the work, and he's the one keeping track of the membership list along with CLA. But we have some questions that I'd like to go to in our question and answer. Just making sure that I didn't miss anything here. Okay. So one of the questions was, there is some interest in the budget process. And I know you said that could be a whole different presentation, but could you briefly outline the budget process so that we have heard that more and more policy decisions are being made in the budget process. So if you could describe that would be helpful.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to start off by saying, is that we're seeing more and more take place through the budget, rather than specifically as bills that are going through the legislative cycle. And so it's becoming more and more important to be following the budget process, to be following what's put in, what's left out, and to get involved in that to the extent that you can or wish to, depending on your organization and interests. Generally, the budget process, January 10th, the governor comes out with an initial budget. That process will get revised throughout the couple of months after that introduction. Legislators will often reach out and put things into that, or ask to put things into that budget that they are that they care about, that they are interested in, that they would like to see funded in the state of California. In May, there's what's called the May revise, which is the date that the governor comes out and does a revision of that initial budget that he had introduced on January 10th. And then that process will then go over the next month and a half-ish, where the governor and the legislature discuss and deliberate about a lot of the various issues. And at the end of June, the budget has to be passed in order for things to move effectively in the state of California. And so by June 30th, the budget should have passed, and then the process will begin again. A lot of things are being handled as trailer bills, so which are statutory changes that will then implement some item of the budget. And so you'll often see a lot of trailer bills coming out with various items that will then allow for something to have happened in the budget. And so this is a place where a lot of various issues get tucked into, get added, get funded. And so it's really becoming more and more important to be following along with the budget, understanding what's taking place. Happy to do a presentation, on this, or have a conversation with someone offline about, some of the big things that are cropping up this year. Obviously, this year the budget is going to be revised significantly because of the wildfires and the devastation that's occurred in Los Angeles and surrounding areas. And so, the budget is going to be revised significantly, because the budget, while it was introduced on January 10th, had obviously been produced prior to that date. And so it was prior to the fires occurring. But generally, I would be happy to talk about the budget process, but those are just some of the key dates to kind of be following along with, and to potentially be following your legislators if they're trying to include specific things, or the legislators who are working on specific issues that you potentially, care about and want to see funded.
So one thing we didn't talk about, and I don't know if there's a question about this, I'll get to all of the questions, but there was our spot bills. And this year you mentioned that, so if you could describe what that is, and also maybe we should take down the slides for a minute so that people can see you on a big screen.
Yes.
Thank you. And so if you could talk about what a spot bill is,
Mm-hmm.
and this year, and I'm asking you to take out your crystal ball, this year with fewer bills being introduced, do you anticipate as many spot bills?
Yeah, that's a great question, Leah. I had meant to mention that previously, when we've done this one-on-one presentation, we've included a look ahead at what has been introduced, but I think we're doing this presentation a little bit earlier than we have in the past, and so I didn't include the breakdown of what's been introduced, because I didn't think it would be helpful yet to say what's been introduced, because a lot of legislators are waiting, throughout the next week and a half to really introduce their legislation. And so I didn't think those numbers would be helpful, but a spot bill is a spot bill and intent bill are different things, but they're often used interchangeably to refer to bills that are where the language has not been fleshed out, and it's just something that is a placeholder. But the actual term for a spot bill is something that's going to amend a code section in a really innocuous way. So make a small change to that, and it might not be laid out specifically in the bill itself. And then an intent bill is a bill that says, this bill intends to to cover this specific issue, but it doesn't actually do it. It's sort of a bare bones skeleton. And as Leah mentioned, we have in the past seen a lot of spot and intent bills that have been introduced. Last year was an incredibly, or last year or the year before, now they're kind of blending together, was 2 years ago, was a very high number of spot bills and intent bills, because of the fact that about a third of the legislature had turned over, meaning there were about a third new legislators in office. And so a lot of them were just getting up to speed, getting their staff and everything in January and in February. And so many bills were introduced that were just kind of the bare bones to meet the legislative deadline, and then would be fleshed out and worked on more. I do anticipate we're going to still see a lot of that this year because of the fact that a quarter of the legislature is new. Also because I think a lot of things were revised. I think a lot of issues that legislators were perhaps going to work on prior to the wildfires, and then the much more focused intensity on the insurance industry in California. I think maybe some legislators are determining that they're going to set some other issues aside that they were going to introduce and work on, and have been over the past few weeks trying to work on ways that they can get involved with the conversation about rebuilding, about CEQA, about insurance, and various issues. And so I think a lot of the legislators are going to be revising what their bill packages were going to look like, which is why I think we're seeing, fewer bills introduced at this point in time than we have previously. So the difference between, intent and spot bills and that sort of thing is obviously for us as viewers, we will not, know exactly what is going to happen, or what is the issue itself with the bill. And so it will, we will have to track that. Bills could be changed into and morphed into something that you don't support or do support as time goes on, but that happens just generally with bills. So that was a very long-winded answer. I hope that answered the question.
I did. I also wanted to know what you thought about the fact that this year they reduced the number of bills, and next year, but it's the beginning of a 2-year session, correct?
Yes.
So how is there an impact to the 2-year session with the reduction?
Yes. So typically more bills are introduced in the first year, for the reason that, bills can become 2-year bills. Issues can take longer to percolate. A lot of times the first year will just start the conversation, kind of get various stakeholders engaged and involved with the process. And so we will see more bills introduced than we will see next year. And so, but still within that more, we're seeing 1,400, I think, fewer bills, just generally overall is the intent. And so I think we're going to see a much more manageable number of bills for the legislators themselves to be going through and to be spending time on and focusing on, for their staff. Every legislator has staff that cover various issues. So a staffer who covers environmental issues, a staffer who covers a docket involving women's issues, involving education issues. And so it's cutting down on the number of bills that they're going to have to be focusing on, and helping them so that they can really move more deeply into those issues and complexity. And also it's trying to encourage a lot more collaboration amongst legislators, a lot more co-authoring and signing on and supporting one another's bills, as opposed to each legislator having to have their say about a specific issue. So hopefully it will foster a lot more collaboration.
That would be nice. So earlier on in your slides, you mentioned various tracking programs for following legislation. And one of our attendees asked, which paid or free programs do you recommend for being notified on bills in the various areas?
So with regard to the free programs, the Leg Info, which is the one that's put out by the legislature, is phenomenal. It's very easy to follow. It includes the legislative history. You can see redlined versions of bills, previous versions of the bills. You can follow what policy committees the bills are going to, who's voted yes or no on the bill, what the policy analysts have said about the bill. So I find even if you are going to be using other sources, other paid resources or that sort of thing, it's really helpful to move into Leg Info and really understand it. Obviously happy to give a tutorial, though it's pretty pretty easy to follow along.
Will they send you an update on the bill, or is this one of the programs that does not send you updates?
It doesn't send updates, but you can sign up for, and I sign up through a different organization, so I don't know if you can sign up, but I believe that you can, but don't quote me on it, that you can sign up to get alerts about the bill. with Leginfo, but I'd have to actually play around with it a little further because I get alerts through a different source. But I believe that you can get alerts to find out through Leginfo about specific bills, but you can like tag them, I think.
So I hear a number of people use Capital Tracker. Is that something you need to pay for?
Gosh, I think Capital Tracker is a paid for site.
Okay, but that's one that I know will update you, keep you updated on status of bills. You may have to log in, but once you do, you get the updates.
I think it's a paid site, or you get one state or one person free. I'd have to look. But yes, you're right, that is a great source for tracking.
So one of our attendees asked if so one person just mentioned that yes, Leginfo will give you alerts. Okay.
Thank you so much for the person who wrote that. Appreciate it.
Someone asked, what happens if a bill dies? Is there an opportunity to revive a bill? And I think this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about how a bill dies. You know, that it's either, well, I'll let you handle it.
Yeah, no, and please jump in also. You also are an expert on this. And so don't feel like I have to answer all the questions, Leah. You can totally do so if you'd like. But yes, bills can die in a variety of ways, as Leah mentioned. Sometimes an author will introduce a bill and then realize that because of some opposition or some issues that have arisen, that they want to pull the bill and not move forward with it. That maybe it's not the right year, maybe they need to do a little bit more work with various stakeholder communities. We see this a lot in our environmental work with environmental justice issues. Perhaps there hasn't been a robust engagement with environmental justice community prior to a bill introduction, and so perhaps a bill is pulled to have more thorough conversations with affected community members. That's an example that I have seen. Sometimes bills are introduced and pulled because the opposition is just so great. I had a bill when I was at the Humane Society that was pulled because there was so much opposition from the NRA that it was just eating up the time of the legislative staffers to work on anything else and to really get their message across on any of the other issues that were in the bill package. And so that issue was pulled. So bills can be, pulled or kind of not move forward at the very beginning of a process. They can be reintroduced in a following year. Sometimes bills throughout the committee process won't pass. So not everything passes out of a committee. Not everything passes off of the assembly floor or the Senate floor. And so, if a bill dies at some point throughout that process, the legislator can determine if that's an issue that they want to raise again in a future year. Other legislators could see that was an issue that, and take it up in a future year in a different capacity. We see this all the time where, one legislator will introduce something, it won't move forward, and then another legislator in the following year will, pick up from where that legislator left off or a different issue. Bills often die at some point throughout that process, throughout the policy committee process, as it's determined maybe that there's too much complexity or too many issues or too much opposition, not enough support for an issue. And then you'll see bills die, not as many, but you'll see bills die, obviously, the ones that are vetoed by the governor. Like I mentioned, about 15 or 16% last year. The governor will often give indications throughout as to how to craft the bill so that there is a higher likelihood of being successful. I think with the question you may have asked, how do you stop it or how do you resurrect it?
Is there an opportunity to revive a bill?
So yes, so there's definitely opportunity in future years to revive the bill, to bring up. A lot of times you'll see legislators literally introduce the exact same bill year after year. And there are many issues where the time just wasn't right. There needed to be more public support, more advocacy groups supporting a bill, more legislators understanding the issue. The tides could shift in terms of what Californians care about. And so just because a bill is not successful the first time does not mean that it should never be introduced again. There's a lot of great legislation that took a few years to pass for a variety of reasons. And so I think when I first started in this field, years ago, I thought that that was like a kiss of death, that if something was, did not move forward the first time, that it should never be reintroduced. And then I realized a lot of times it just means more outreach, more education, more understanding for the public needs to, more of a public outcry needs to happen. And so it's a great opportunity for those of us who, really are passionate about this field to help advance bills that we care about.
So I wanted to ask you, and I'm catching you completely off guard. We didn't talk about this at all earlier. If you were to give people one tip on getting involved with the legislative process, what would that be?
Oh gosh. I would say, I think a couple things. The first is I would watch some of the policy committees. I think it's a great way of finding out what the issues are, especially, the environmental or toxics. One of the committees that is environmentally related. I'm assuming people on this call are, care about those issues. Following along with the policy committees. So you can just watch them, from the Senate, the Assembly. You could just put those on in the background and watch while you're doing work. You can watch them online. You can listen to them online. Might be kind of nerdy, but I really feel like it's fascinating. It's a great way of, figuring out what issues are really heated, what's going on, who are the players, what are the advocacy organizations behind something. Reading the comments from the policy analysts are incredibly helpful. That's on LegInfo. So I think those are two ways that I would get started in terms of just figuring out what are the issues and what's happening in the legislature. If you're looking to get involved in advocating or that sort of thing about various issues, you could get on action alerts or listservs for various organizations that you care about or are aligned with, so that they can be sharing with you information that you care about, or when to get involved, when to reach out to your representatives and voice your, support or opposition. And then I think the last night of the legislative session is always a lot of fun. It's something that I always talk with my students about. It's incredibly exciting to watch kind of the filibustering, the maneuvering, what things are making it through. You get more of a sense of who the legislators are, what they care about, what the power dynamics are, what the various issues that get moved to the top and the bottom are. And so it's a really great way of kind of just getting a sense of what's happening. I find it really fascinating. Grab your popcorn, stay up till midnight and watch the legislative session.
So we have just a minute. I know we have another 2 questions, so we'll get to those, but just a little war story. I worked on a piece of legislation that was, sailed through both, was just about to be voted out of the second house, and the governor's office then had a number of changes. And we negotiated all the changes, and it went to the floor the final night of the session. And I think it takes a certain kind of adrenaline junkie to really enjoy that. I was, I felt I'd put in 6 months or 8 months of hard work writing the legislation, working with council, working with the legislator staff, being at all the hearings and everything. And it came down to that last night. And so some people grab their popcorn, and I just think just get through it. Just get through
Yeah,
it.
maybe you grab your Xanax. I don't know. But yes, I will say, you know, which is another example of how a bill could die is sometimes it has to have a concurrence vote, has to run back to the Senate or run back to the Assembly, and then it just doesn't make it because some other big issue that's very contentious has taken over and somebody's, you know, filibustering and kind of like letting the clock run out. And when I was at the Humane Society, a bill died that had full bipartisan 100% support and made it to that last night. And then didn't get that final hearing. And so, you know, we had to continue the issue the following year. And so it's an example that just because something hasn't moved forward doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem with the bill. And the other thing I'll say about that is, you know, it's also very helpful to recognize, and as much as possible, and obviously this is up to the legislators, but, you know, if you're working with somebody on a specific issue, is to try to have the hearing and that get cleared as, you know, far away as possible from the last night, because that can happen where things just get caught in the crossfire.
If it's a 2-year session, you have a hope, and if not, it needs to be reintroduced.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a question about the tenure for committee members. So a legislator is assigned to a committee. How long does that legislator serve on a committee? How long can that legislator serve on a committee?
Yeah, that's a great question. So within the legislature itself, although I'm not sure this is the question, the legislature itself is 12 years. So term limits were introduced about 12 or 13 years ago, which is why we've seen in the past couple of years such turnover. We won't see that again for a few years, you know, to the degree that we have. And then you know, again, we will in about a dozen years start to, or maybe in about 10 years, start to see a big change again. But I think the question was about the committees themselves. So the Senate and the Assembly leaders, so the Senate pro tem, the Assembly speaker, are the ones who choose leadership and committee membership for the various policy committees that I've discussed. That usually changes every year. And so they just introduced in December the Speaker pro tem and the Assembly Speaker just introduced their new roster of who were going to be the committee chairs as well as committee members. Those usually last throughout the year, but you know, people can be pulled from various committees. You know, if the Senate or Assembly leadership determines that they should be removed for some reason, people can get off of a committee. Sometimes committees, the same general makeup or, you know, general leadership will stay in effect for a couple of years. But it's really at the pleasure of the Senate and the Assembly leadership. Every once in a while, you know, we saw once last year, a senator switched political parties, which changed, you know, the makeup of the committees that she was involved in. And so, you know, various things can happen throughout the year.
Thank you. I think we're pretty close to out of time. Before we sign off, I want to thank you a million billion %. Thank you so much. I don't think you can have a million billion %, but whatever.
I'll take it.
I want to thank you for giving this presentation, and you're a wealth of information, and we really appreciate it. For everyone who attended, CLA will send you out a self-study MCLE certificate, and we'll let you know where to find the recording and the PowerPoint, which was another question we had. Will the PowerPoint be available? Yes. And we'll also post it on the Environmental Law Section webpage. I want to remind you that if you're interested in participating in the Environmental Law Section Legislation Committee, you should email Pam Amundsen at California Lawyers Association or Justin Zucker at pattersononeal.com. And, you know, just reach out to CLA. We'll make sure that you'll be on our listserv. And then we'll reach out to you as co-chairs to solicit the areas of expertise or the areas of legislation that you're interested in reviewing. And with that, I want to thank you again. There's a virtual round of applause going on. So thank you. And thank you for participating today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here and looking forward to collaborating and communicating later. Thanks so much, Leah. So great to see you.
See you.
And thanks, Pam.